Okay, well, let's get started. Hello and welcome to another of our FME educational webinars. This time it's going to be our focus around FME Desktop and the feature caching mode that you can use in FME Workbench. We're going to take a look at how it can aid and empower your workspace design, and we're also going to show you how it helps when you're trying to unpick or debug a particular tricky data issue. So that's the plan. My name's David Eagle and I'm the FME Division Manager at OneSpatial, and I'm joined by my colleagues who'll be monitoring the live chat. So please feel free to use the chat function, and if you've got any questions that you'd like to send our way, go ahead. As usual, I'll do my best to deal with anything that you might ask during the session, but if I can't deal with it quickly, then we will follow up with you straight afterwards if you leave your contact details for us. If it's your first time with us, welcome. We're OneSpatial, and our focus as a business is to help you to unlock the value of your data. We're keen to live in a smarter world, and we think that making your data smarter and of a greater quality is just one way that we can all help ourselves to do that. We're a software development company in our own right, and we've been building software for 50 years to help manage our customers' data quality. But we recognise that there are other companies in our space that offer huge value in what they do, that can complement our expertise. And over the years, we've selected a number of firms to work closely with in partnership. And I'm going to be focusing today on our Platinum partnership with Safe Software, because they're the makers of the FME platform. Safe Software are based in Vancouver in Canada, and we're a reseller partner in the UK, Australia, France, and the US. And we've got experts also in Ireland, Belgium, and Tunisia. As a business, we focus our attention on three core vertical markets, so that's government, utilities, and transportation, and we've got dedicated solutions around each. But we find that because FME enables data connectivity to all sorts of locations, databases, APIs, almost any sector that finds it necessary to move or manipulate their data can get value from FME. The logos that you can see here are just some of the companies leveraging the power of FME to assist them. So here's the focus for today, a little bit of a dive into the pool that is cache mode, and that's a feature in FME Desktop's Workbench application. We're going to look at how to use it, when to use it, and importantly, what the implications are of using it. Fundamentally, this is a design mode that you apply to your workspace at an application level, and it runs your data through FME, allowing detailed inspection along the way. But let's dig into that a little bit more. So I'm going to just make a few changes at this end, and I'm just going to bring a workspace into view on screen. So what you can see here is FME Workbench and a workspace open and ready to go. But before I get into the detail of how to benefit from cache mode in Workbench, I want to start by showing you how we built workspaces before cache mode was introduced. The new capability arrived in FME Workbench in about 2018, early 2018. But before that, understanding what had just happened in your process wasn't quite so quick and easy. In 2017 and prior to that, we had to use an inspector transformer. So this example workspace here, for the sake of this scenario, we're going to assume that it's been built by a colleague, and I'm trying to decipher what it does. Now, whilst a well-documented workspace is usually fairly simple to work your way through, there's often no substitute for getting hands-on and running it step by step to see what happens as features pass through it. So what I'm going to do is in FME 2022 that I'm looking at the moment, I've got a number of different run modes, and you can see that there is something called feature caching, enable feature caching, but I'm going to leave that turned off for a moment because I want to run this workspace and just sort of talk you through what it's doing. So when I kick it off to begin with, What we have are some parameters that prompt and run us here to describe what data we're reading in. And first thing to note is that all of this data is open data from Surrey Heath Borough Council. It's a local authority in the south of England, and what we're doing is pulling the data direct from their website. So we're not working with a local cached copy of the data. This is the live data that we're going to bring in. And that's this data here, and there is also a transformer called a feature reader, and that's also consuming some content too. So we've got a bunch of data that's going to be pulled from multiple locations, and it's going to pipe its way through the workspace and make its way through to different steps along the way. So each of these blue things on screen are transformers, and they are going to manipulate the data as it works its way through. The feature reader here is consuming property data. So this is building properties, and you can see that there's 173 of those. This is ward boundary data, so some polygons, and here we have a boundary for the entire extent of Surrey Heath Borough Council. And then there's some effort that goes on further on through the workspace. But you'll see that, you know, without using this mythical cache mode that we're here to talk about, what we've actually got is a workspace that we've run to completion. And to go and find out what each of these tools did or what the entire process does, we've either got to rely on going and opening up the finally written out data, which in this case will be an AutoCAD drawing file. So there's a feature writer transformer here that ultimately will create a DWG file. And you can see that that is specified there. So sh ward and assets.dwg. It's not connected yet, so that's not that part of the process isn't working, but we'll get to that in a minute. Alternatively, what we've got to do is we've got to use something called an inspector transformer. Now, if I go and search for an inspector in the transformer quick add, you can see that I can add the inspector to the canvas. And if I want to go and find out what's happening up, actually we'll go one step ahead here. If we want to go and look at the data that's coming out of this input, I need to rerun the process and you know, wait for the entirety of the process to finish in order to go and take a look at that data. So there we go, it's piping its way through. Those 173 features are going to get thrown into the visual preview window that we can see down at the bottom of the screen. And you can see in here it's trying to load the data set, and actually in this case all we've got is tabular data. We have no geometry. So that little icon there indicates that it's a table. There are 173 rows. We've got a unique property reference number. We've got a name, a street name, a postcode, a X and Y coordinates, and some ownership status. So whether it's freehold or in some cases leasehold properties. So that's the detail. Now, what I might want to do is go and find out, well, what happens next step along the way. So this workspace has been built by somebody else. I'm trying to decipher what's going on. I can right click on a transformer and I can connect an inspector. So that gives me an inspector transformer. It names it with the name of the transformer in the output port that I've connected to. And then if I rerun the process from start to finish, I will get to look at the data at that stage in the sequence. So if we think of this as a flow diagram where data is running through this flow chart effectively, and at each stage something else is new, and you can see now it's not a tabular content only. What we've actually got is a little bit of geometry because we have managed some attributes. We've set a coordinate system. In this case, we've applied the coordinate system and set it into British National Grid, and then we've created a point using the X and Y coordinates that we have in the table here, the easting and northing, to specify a location and to get that so that it shows on a background map, and you can see we're sort of in the Camberley and Farnborough region, and then there's London, just to give you a little bit of context. So it's a little bit long-winded to get to, get a bit of gratification. You can see that this is handy and it's quite workable, but it's not fast. It means that every time you want to look at a result of what you've achieved, you have to rerun the entire process from start to finish. And the result of that is that you have if you've got a lot of data, it's not exactly an instant response. You may have to wait minutes or hours, and especially if you also had to grab the data from the internet or maybe query it from a database and pull it across a slow network connection. So just to go to what might be the next stage, for many years we've also had a data inspection mode that's been a little bit more managed than that and staged, and it's called run with breakpoints. And I want to show you how that works now, because not many people know about it, and it can be handy in specific scenarios. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to zoom in onto my workspace, and I'm going to go into just after the feature reader, and I'm going to right click on the link. And it's important that you look at the links for this, because halfway or a third of the way down the little pop-up menu there, we've got an option to add a breakpoint. Okay, and it throws an enormous red stop sign effectively on that link. And then we have to go and alter the mode that this workspace is running in. So we have to come down to here and we say stop at breakpoints, and you can see that that is now turned on. Okay, so the sequence here then is, if I just zoom out a little bit and push the run button, everything's as it was before, except that we have a breakpoint at which the first feature is going to hit that connection, and it will automatically throw up a way of visualizing that individual feature. And this capability has been around for a little while, and it's designed to allow you to not only understand an individual feature and what you've done to it, but also, and the way that I personally use this, is to trace the route that a feature takes through your flowchart, through your script, through your workspace. So you can see here that the first feature, has made its way to this point, and I get to see it. Okay, so I get to see some of the details. So we can see that this is a freehold property. We have a postcode, and this is the feature inspection window, and I've got a few magic buttons down the bottom here. One says step to next connection. The other one says continue to next breakpoint. So you can put breakpoints throughout your workspace, and you can allow yourself to look at a particular feature at each breakpoint. Personally, I'm a bit lazy. I tend to just add one breakpoint, and then I use this button here, which is step to next connection, because I want to see what happens to it as it goes along the way. So this attribute manager renames street space name to street name with no space, and it adds an attribute called layer and sets it to property. So if we go and look here, we can see we've got an attribute called layer set to property, and street name here has been renamed with no space. And then I can step to next connection, and we can see that now the feature has a coordinate system, whereas it didn't have before. And then what we can do is, if I just zoom out a little bit, is I can then rattle my way through, and you can see that each feature makes its way, and I can look at it at every stage. And importantly, you can see that as I keep clicking, we get to see how far features get before FME has to send the next feature through the process. So effectively, because this transformer isn't connected up, it becomes a dead end. And over here, we've got a transformer called a sampler, and the sampler says, go and sample off the first of the last feature. So basically, it's the last feature. So what you can see is I've got two dead ends, at which point it has to start feeding me data from the beginning of the workspace again. So super handy, especially if you're trying to trace blocking points or areas where you've got a memory accumulation. So from an advanced point of view, it's a really, really handy technique. You've also got the ability with breakpoints to come in and you can edit a breakpoint. So you can put in a test clause that says, well, only show me a feature that is a freehold property and ignore everything else. Maybe you want to show everything, or like we're doing at the moment, or you want to say when the hit count is 100 or greater than a certain amount, then start showing me data. And that's useful if you're trying to track down some problem data. I'm just going to stop this process though running in this mode, because this webinar is not about breakpoints, it's about cache mode. So that's just a useful aside. In order to sort of clean things up, I'm going to go and disable that breakpoint. In fact, I'm going to go one step further. I'm going to just go in and I'm going to remove the breakpoint, and then I'm going to remove the stop at breakpoints. Now you can leave your breakpoints there permanently, but you do need to remove the stop at breakpoint if you want to stop it from running in that mode. But let's get to the main event. As now then it's time to look specifically at cache mode, which is after all the point of this session. In FME 2018 we got part of this functionality which gave us scope to run parts of a workspace in isolation of other parts, and it was called partial run. After some further development, that functionality became what we know as today as cache mode, and in my humble opinion, it's the singularly most important bit of functionality that's made it into FME Desktop, at least since 2006. And that was when SAFE added the feature count functionality to the connections in a completed workspace. Basically, the addition of these little connectors and the value that we see here that came in. So those, two features for me, pretty darn important. So because I think this functionality is so important, it's why we felt it was worthy of a dedicated webinar in its own right. So cache mode completely changes how you author and test your workspace, and it means if you've made a silly mistake, you can fix it and see that fix in a matter of seconds rather than hours. Cache mode, most importantly, however, allows you to perform a partial run of one very specific part of your workspace. This can be very helpful if your process is failing downstream, as you can trace the process all the way up to that issue. But you can also try out different parameter settings in an unfamiliar transformer quickly, see the results, change the parameter, see the result again, and then move on, all within just a few clicks. Software developers amongst you will be familiar with this capability because it mirrors what developers have called this capability for years. It's basically a form of unit testing. For those of you to whom this is an unfamiliar term, a unit test is a way of testing a unit of code, the smallest piece of code that can be logically isolated in a system. In most programming languages, that's a function, a subroutine, a method, or property. The isolated part of the definition is the important bit because you isolate that change away from all other variables. So in the context of FME, you can calculate a new attribute value in isolation of making an HTTP call, for example, when you might have a spotty internet connection, or in isolation of writing to a disk that you might not have permission to access. It means you know if one part of your process works in isolation of the other parts. Let's take a look at what we mean. So in order to do this, I'm just going to zoom extents in this workspace, pull in just a little bit, and then I'm going to go in and enable feature caching mode, and then I'm going to run the entire workspace from beginning to end. And we're just going to let that rattle through so that you can see that make its way. So you can see that what we've got here is a little new little animation effectively. When we've got a large workspace, what you see is that little green magnifying glass, as it is now, effectively fills up like a paint pot with green paint. And that's the cache filling up, because there's a cache at every one of those locations. What we've also got is the ability to have these little mid-process run points. So we can run just this, we can run from this, or we can run, in this case, to this. And you can see that those little run buttons will be highlighted, or will highlight sections of the workspace. And you can see that over here, the section at the bottom there is not green highlighted because it doesn't need to rerun that part. So here you can see that if I wanted to, I can just close this workspace. I'm not going to save any of those changes. I'm going to open it back up again, and then I'm going to just come in, and if I was coming at this from a fresh process, I could come to this point and say, well, I haven't seen this workspace before, I wonder what this bit does. Run to this, and it'll run the creator fires one feature into the workspace to the date time stamper, and we can see here that we've got a value that's returned. This is the year, the month, and today's date, and then we've got hours, minutes, seconds, and if we make that a bit bigger, decimal seconds. So that's the time format. If we then wanted to go one step further, we could say run to this, and that will actually go to the internet and go and grab the CSV file, download it, parse it, and push it into the rest of the workspace if we wanted it to go that far. And then we can go on, inspect that feature, and we can see that we've got 173 rows of data that we can go and browse our way through here. And you'll see that the magnifying glass, when I click on it, it gives me the eye symbol to allow us to see, to highlight that that's what we're looking at in this visual preview down at the bottom here. So we don't need to wait for the entire workspace to run. For example, because this part here has gone and downloaded some data and has populated a local cache, when we go to this transformer and push run, we don't need to wait for that internet connection to happen again and it to go and do the download. It just goes and does the attribute management part of that workflow. So it takes, points of a second instead of several seconds to run to that point, because we're only actually running the attribute manager in its own right there. But it is important, if I just run all of this workspace again, and I'm going to click run workspace, which means that you'll see that that first part of the workspace is not highlighted green just here, which means that the data is going to be pulled from the caches. So I get a little bit of performance benefit, but I still do need to read this data from the internet and carry out some of the latter processes. That will just populate all the local caches that haven't already been done. If I run that through, what I want to show you is the impact of making a change in the workspace. So for example, in the attribute manager here, if I go in and just change a value, so I'm going to, instead of setting this value to property, I'm going to set it to property new. All of a sudden, what you can see is everywhere downstream of that change, I now have a little symbol that is no longer green, it's actually yellow. And what that means is that if you see on the tooltip there, it says cache is stale or contains features from a failed translation. So it basically means the cache isn't up to date. We've made a change, and if I go and inspect the data here, it does not say property new. I actually have to go and rerun the data to that point to refresh the cache to be able to see the change that I've made, and you can see that is now property new. Okay, so I'm just going to go back and just get rid of that because I don't want it to be like that, and you'll see that then I've got to go and refresh it again. And if I click run, all it does is just goes and runs the portions of the workspace that need to have their caches refreshed. Okay, so the last thing I'm just going to show you is that if I come in and click on those that stage in the workflow where I've got the geometry, and actually I'm just going to make the background map a little bit less obvious so you can see the points, and I can come in and I can make the vertices a bit more prominent as well. But I want to show you that if I go and click on, say, the ward boundaries here, as soon as I do that, I lose my selection. So I'm effectively toggling between these things. The trick here is if you press the control key and hold it down, you can then add to your selection, which means that I can now see both of those bits of information. So I can see the points and the ward boundaries. So I can make my points a little bit bigger, and I can make them, say, red, and I can apply that, and then you can see the change. And then I can zoom in on a particular area. So just wanted to highlight that, that selection capability. Now, just to switch topics briefly, some of you that will be up to speed with functionality in the more recent versions of FME will be familiar with the concept of data awareness with respect to how cache mode can manifest itself when performing tasks with attributes. Let me show you by adding a tester after this attribute manager. So if I just come into here, I'm just going to add a tester to the canvas and hook it up to the attribute manager. And I'm just going to run the data to that point. And the benefit of doing that prior to actually going in and setting the test is that it populates the caches inside the tester, which means that then I can benefit from this data awareness capability. So I can actually dive into the settings here, and I can go and have a look at what we've got in those pre-populated caches. So I'm just going to wait for that to make its way through. There we go. And we're going to go into here. And I'm going to go to ownership equals. Now, in the old days, I'd have to type a value in here or pick from an attribute value or something, but I've actually got the caches populated now, so I can just say where ownership is equal to leasehold, and then I can run this process and find out which how many leasehold records and how many freehold records I've got. I should also just highlight that this machine that I'm running this process on is under heavy load from a memory point of view, because I'm delivering a webinar, I'm running recording software, so it is running a little bit slower than you would expect to see this. So just need to point that out at this stage. So there we go. So I'm just going to grab that. There we go. And you see I've just got 6 leasehold records there, and down here I've got the freehold records, 167 of those. Okay, so it's pretty handy there. If I go and take a look, and this can be super handy really in transformers like the attribute filter as well, because we can even get FME to key in some values for us to save ourselves a bout of fat finger or error-prone typing. If we dive over to the attribute filter, I can show you what I mean. So the attribute filter is just here, and this is a transformer that we actually want to fix and hook up a little bit. If I go into my attribute filter settings, what we can do under the layer is I could type property, and you see as I start to type, I can pick from the cache, so I don't need to have to finish typing that. But I've got potentially lots of attributes that I want to filter by, attribute values to filter by here, and I don't want to have to type them all in. So I can now in FME 2022 import from the feature cache. So I can just dive over here, those are the values that are in that cache, and then we're done. And now I've got my boundary, property, and wards. So if I hook up my boundary data, hook up my wards, hook up my properties, and then I tend to get a bit upset if I cross the streams, so I'm going to move that down just to keep things nice and tidy. This just serves you well from a best practice point of view if you tidy things up as you go. And now what that means is that I can run the workspace all the way through to the end, and hopefully will get my DWG popping out into my target folder. Okay, and if I just go to here, you can see that I've got an option that says open containing folder, and as it pipes its way in, we can see that we've got a DWG that is just completing that. There we go. So if I just nudge that round here, and there we go. And there's the DWG that's turned up there. So just to prove that that's around. So that's an AutoCAD drawing file, or DWG, and that's the output to this process. And you can see that I've got my property features that get styled up, my wards and my boundaries go off in those different directions. Okay, there's a few important peripheral points to make about cache mode as well, and it's important to touch on those now before we get to the end of this session. The first is that feature caches are portable. And what I mean by that is that if you have a workspace that's, say, connected to a database like Oracle, and you want to send the workspace to somebody that doesn't have connectivity to that database, or perhaps like me, your data's online, but you need to move your process to a machine that is offline to do some of the testing, you can actually save your workspace as a template file, which is effectively a portable zip file that includes the workspace and potentially your source data all in one bundle. But in recent years, and not many people have spotted this, we've also been given the ability to include all of the feature caches too. So if I just go and make sure we've got all our caches populated, if I just go to File, Save As Template, there's the template file name. You can see it's got a FMWT name, file extension. This is going to be a Surrey Heath open data process, and we're going to include the feature caches. And you've also got the ability here to add in additional files. Now, because this data is online, the purpose of this is to make the process a bit more portable with the caches already provided. I've already got a template created, so I'm just going to overwrite that. I'm going to close this one down, and then I'm going to open up that cache template, and you can see that the caches are already there. So I can immediately go and inspect the data without having to even run the process. And that has got a lot of value when you're working with disparate data sets or sharing content. And actually, from a technical support point of view, if you're engaging with our technical support team and you're wanting to send a workspace and allow us to look at the data that is failing through your process, this is a really, really good technique to use. Finally, then, I just want to take a moment to highlight the impact of cache mode on the performance of your process. And basically, it's not good. Cache mode fundamentally slows down the speed at which you can process your data. And that's because at every location where there's a cache stored, FME is actually physically writing to your local disk. So if you have a workspace processing 100,000 features and it includes 10 transformers, you're potentially caching, say, 1 million records, and maybe more if your transformers have more than one output port, and all of that to your local disk. So you can see here in this one transformer, we're going to be caching features here, here, and here. We've got all of the data that's here, and we've got it here, but with additional attributes that have been added to it. Not only is that a lot of extra effort, but it can also mean that this bulk load of data can temporarily, at least, impact your peak memory utilization. So from a performance point of view, cache mode is a very bad thing. And the conclusion we can therefore draw is that using cache mode when you're building a workspace testing a workspace or debugging a workspace is exactly what it's designed for, especially if your source data is in a database or at the end of an API that you have to pay to hit. Using cache mode means you can grab the data once from the source, take the hit of the network traffic or the need to pay for it in API credits once, and then for the rest of your testing, just use the data caches in your workspace to complete your testing. But do not leave cache mode switched on for your production runs of your workspace, because apart from it potentially taking more minutes, hours, or days longer than it needed to have done, it may also fail because your local resources are not geared to handle such a potential volume of extra cache data. So hopefully I've said that enough. Cache mode is amazing when you're building your workspace, but when it's complete, turn it off till you need it next. Okay, so just to show you what I mean, I'll just go to the log for a moment. I'm going to go and I'm going to rerun the entire workspace from scratch, and we're just going to let that pipe its way through. And what we're going to see is what the runtime of this log is. Now, this is not a particularly heavy processing workspace, but you can see that that took 11.8 seconds to run that through. And if I go and disable feature caching and go and run this through, this is a bit of a litmus test, but we'll go and rerun the entire workspace. Away it goes. So cache mode's not turned on. Pipe its way through, 11.8 to beat. And fingers crossed it does, because this is a demo after all, but there we go, 6.4. So sort of around about the halfway mark. If we'd taken a look at the peak process memory usage, I think in this case it's a few thousand kilobytes better off by not having cache mode turned on at peak. And that doesn't mean too much right now, but in a much more involved workspace with a larger volume of data, that's a big issue. Okay, and finally, all right, I know I've said and finally already, but really this is it. FME Server has no concept of cache mode. I mention it as my parting point because I'm occasionally asked about FME Server and cache mode, and I know that my colleagues Simon, Mary and Ian are always asked variations of this question as well. The way to think about cache mode is as being a workspace authoring mode, or a design mode if you like, and you do that in FME Desktop. It's intended that you use caching to construct a workspace because that's when a partial run is useful. Each time you add a new transformer, for example, you can test its operation by just running that transformer, not the whole workspace. But in production, and especially when you move the process to FME Server, you turn caching off, or actually because you aren't editing the workspace and because the end user won't want to do a partial run, it becomes irrelevant. So in FME Server, cache mode isn't a thing. In fact, when you publish your workspace to FME Server, it can't recognize that the FMW was last run in cache mode because the setting is at the FME Desktop application level, not the workspace level. The only time a cache is useful on FME Server is for reading datasets and hitting web services. And there is already a caching option on the feature reader transformer that can be used to assist with that. So there you go. That was a whistle-stop tour of the feature caching functionality, and we hope that you got some value from this bite-sized training session. So to conclude, what do you do next if you want some more help? Well, I guess feel free to get in touch to find out more about this topic or anything else FME related. Maybe you'd like to do a little bit of your own research first, or perhaps you're already a user and you just want to learn some new skills. To find out what training we offer, what other FME webinars are coming up, or if you want to dig into some of the hours of material that we have recorded and hosted on our on-demand pages on onespatial.com, just follow some of these short URLs to get a little bit more detail, or reach out to us at fme@onespatial.com for some help or a quotation. Alternatively, a URL that you mustn't forget is community.safe.com, because that's where all the tutorials and how-to articles are located, including the chat forum where you can ask thousands of FME users what their FME experience is with a specific challenge that you might have. If you're already a customer of ours, though, on an active maintenance and support agreement or subscription, you can access our priority support service via support@onespatial.com. Though, if you're not sure what the status is of your existing agreement, then just drop a note either now in the chat or after the session, and we'll let you know what you're entitled to. And that's it, other than to leave you with some bedtime reading, really, on the topic that we've just been going through. So Mark Ireland at Safe Software, who's also known as the FME Evangelist on Twitter, he wrote a blog article shortly after the feature caching functionality was added to FME in 2018. And you can get to it by using some of what you see as a browser search here, and put that in to search for it. Alternatively, you can also search for the FME Evangelist blog 174 and you'll get to it. He goes off on a little bit of a tangent about squirrels, but it's definitely worth 10 minutes of your time. There we go. For more information on feature caching or breakpoints or anything else to do with FME or data, do get in touch with us. We'd love to hear from you, and remember to keep an eye on upcoming news and events on our website to register for more training webinars like this. Check out also our training schedule for more formal training classes too. We're on our way to Glasgow at the end of July, and we have a healthy program of online delivered courses as well. But for now, thank you very much, and maybe we'll see you at the next session.